listening to Armchair Radio, where every week we scour the web for the most off-the-wall or interesting news, odds to help you kill your day. From aliens to Atari and even Kanye West, we have something for everyone. And now, without further ado, your host, Chad and Brannon.
So, I mean, I guess just a layman's version, this is all going to just be us, just shooting the shit, talking about it. Because neither of us are experts on this, but it seems like an argument is something that has an if-then kind of quality to it. So it can't just be something that is like a statement. Like if I just say, that bird is blue, that's just a statement. If I say that bird is blue because it eats a certain kind of beetle, that's an argument. I'm making an argument to say, I know why that bird is the way it is, and I want to convince you that it's that way. It can't just be, I'm just asserting it. It has to be, if then kind of thing.
So that's kind of the definition of an argument?
Yeah, basically. I mean, again, it's not the totally, I'm sure there's a more specific, wordy kind of definition, but basically that's it. So anytime somebody says, so these fallacies that we're going to go over, that's errors in that kind of argumentation. So somewhere along the line, they're saying that they're using a form of logic that doesn't actually work. It's all logical issues that we're kind of talking about. So sometimes it's convincing, but it's not actually functional. So whenever it comes to arguments, an argument can be sound, meaning that, so there's soundness and then there's truth, but the soundness of it is like mechanically, like a car. You can look at a car and say the car is sound because all of its parts are functioning. Now you don't know where the car is going, but you can say that the car is sound. That's kind of like the way you could think about the argument, that you look at all the parts of the argument and you could say, okay, there's no flaws in the grammar, I guess you could say. And then the truth value is, okay, now that you've asserted that this thing is working, now you can evaluate all of the different claims that it has. So you could say that bird is blue as part of it, or if a bird is blue, or if it's, whatever the first claim is, you can judge how true it is. So then you can say, okay, there is a blue bird there. Okay, that's true. The second part, because it eats these beetles. So then you can go and check that out too. So you're trying to kind of understand if what the argument is saying. And again, this is something that people go, they spend years learning the math of this stuff. Like they transform statements into math in a weird way. So it'll be like X equals B because Y, that kind of thing. So they take statements like, that bird's blue because it eats snails or whatever. They know how to take that and turn it into a math equation.
Essentially, an argument is basically a block made of smaller blocks, and the truth part of it is going over each individual block that makes up that one big block and saying, is this true? Is this true? Or,
Yes. Like with a magnifying glass. Like if you're going to do it right, if you're, I guess, professionally or whatever. That was the problem I always had whenever I was in critical thinking courses and stuff, is that I'm just not that particular. I'm not that OCD about stuff. The ones that are, they do very well. Like one exercise that we would do is like you bring in anything you find. Number one, we had to figure out if something is an argument. So, they'd give us examples, or we'd go and try to scour the news or headline. It's not hard to find bad arguments. They're everywhere. There's far more bad arguments than there are good arguments. And
what would you consider a bad argument? Like we're being
like an ad hominem attack, or an ad hominem argument. That's one of the ones we're going to talk about. That's where I would say that, Chad, he lives in Louisiana, and people in Louisiana I don't trust, so I'm not going to listen to anything Chad says. Or, you're just one of those Republicans, or, you're just one of those Democrats. I don't have to listen to anything you say, or that kind of thing.
Right,
where
basing your whole character off of one instance of a possible belief.
Yeah, it's like you're basing it on the person instead of what they're saying. So you're ignoring what they're saying, and you're saying, it's just one of those people.
Right.
XYZ, whatever it is, like you're a certain religion, you're a certain race, whatever,
Right.
instead of listening to their, which is interesting because I see a lot of this gaining steam, at least with social media and things like that, because it's compelling to have that kind of language. You know, like Trump uses it, everybody uses it, especially in politics. It's big. It's a big thing to say. You know, the left uses it too. They'll say, well, you're a white man, so I don't have to listen to anything you have to say.
Right.
That's an ad hominem attack. It has no real substance to it. That's basically it for that one. It's basically just you attack the person instead of the belief. But it's funny how, we just mentioned a couple of examples. It's everywhere, and people actually believe it. I guess that's where the critical thinking comes in, is that, you know, if somebody can tell you something very compelling, but it doesn't mean that you have to accept it and then make decisions based on it. Instead, you can say, I refute that. I disagree, because you're basically telling the reasoning that you're telling me this isn't either sound or true. And it shouldn't have any bearing on what you do. But a lot of people they'll say, oh, okay, yeah, I don't like him either then. Right, and they won't even think about it. So that's not critical thinking. That's whatever. That's just thinking normally. So critical thinking is really like you're trying to break down every little detail of what has been said, which is, again, even whenever I speak, I'm not that careful. So I'm sure I'm guilty of all this stuff, but it's good to think about. And I guess the reason I've been thinking about all of these fallacies lately and critical thinking in general is it seems rampant right now and escalating. The amount of trash that just gets through people's filters. Ad hominem attacks are everywhere, literally everywhere. And it's one of the first things that politicians will go for. I mean, if you look at the fight between the left and right, it's basically one side saying the other side is evil and the other side saying the other side's evil.
Right.
And there's nothing to work with. How do you work with that?
Well, and it's what leads to our conversations just going in circles. You know, I've never had any kind of online conversation with somebody that had completely opposing viewpoints to me. Well, I'm not going to say never. There's probably been a couple of times with people I know kind of well, but
personally or something.
Right. For the most part, no one ever like just all of a sudden says, "Oh, what? You know what? You're right. I didn't see it that way." You know, it's the purpose of the conversation is always to prove. Like I'm guilty as well. It's always to prove ourselves right. It's not to find what is correct.
Right. I'd agree with that.
What is the truth, you know? And I think that's where we're really messed up and need to shift the focus on trying to be right. I mean, not to get into politics too much, but
right.
You know,
I mean, all this stuff will be political probably just because the nature of it, you know, it's where arguments happen. Congress
and the House not talking to each other, for the stimulus bill to help with people that are displaced from COVID and whatnot. They haven't passed a bill, not because that's the good thing for the people. They haven't passed a bill because of their own party's need to win.
Yeah. You know, and hatred for the other side.
It has nothing to do with the people. It is completely shot.
So that's kind of what I'm saying is that they're only using fallacious thinking. They're only thinking using the wrong way, but it's actually the weird thing is it's like all these people should know better. I would think they've probably gone to school for all this stuff. They've definitely spent more time doing it than I have. They should know better. But I think the scary thing, I guess, for me is that they probably do. But they know that this other way of arguing works better. Like another good one is the bandwagon kind of thing. You know, where everybody's doing it, so you should do it. That's a very compelling argument. It's actually the most psychologically compelling argument there is.
So wait, this is a separate fallacy?
Yeah, this is like a different one. It's basically like the, everybody's doing it, bandwagon kind of thing. Some of these have many, many names too. You know, it's one of them's called If Then Whiskey or something like that. But it's like, what the fuck does that mean? The bandwagon approach is the most effective means of changing someone's mind there is. If you tell somebody everyone in your neighborhood is doing X, you're going to want to do X. That's, it's just a fact. That's how people work. It's not a good argument though. So that's kind of the issue is like there's compelling because it's emotional or because it's whatever. Rhetoric is what that is. You're just talking and you're getting people to feel a certain way. But yeah, so that's kind of the two poles. It's like, well, what's really tasty or compelling, and then what actually makes sense. And usually they don't coexist. So the ad hominem one, that's just a kind of low hanging fruit, because everybody understands kind of fundamentally how that works. Even on a playground, it's like, oh, you pushed me, or, and people they fight each other first. We learned to do that relatively early, I think. So a slippery slope, that's a totally different example or whatever. But that's one where, you start with something little, a minor thing, and then it leads to something else, and then before you know it, the world's over. So it's like this really overpronounced kind of thing. So one example of that would be like safe injection sites. So people who are addicted to heroin and injectable drugs and stuff like that, their biggest risk is actually dirty needles. So it's not actually the fact that they're doing the drugs that's so deadly most of the time. It's the fact that they have to do it in the circumstances they're in. And so whenever someone talks about, maybe we should open up a safe injection site or something, it usually goes like this. It's like, well, opening safe injection sites will lead to a catastrophic increase in drug use and drug abuse in the neighborhood. More drug use would inevitably lead to more crime, especially violent crime. And then the neighborhood would be overrun with criminals and fall apart at the seams. So that's an example of that.
Right. So how do you use fallacies?
They're mostly things to recognize, and they're red flags. I guess I think of them that way. They're red flags.
So you would kind of, if you're reading an article with someone arguing about flat Earth or something,
right? You
would take their argument and just kind of go down the list of these fallacies and kind of put them through the.
Yeah. It's kind of like that. Like you try to get familiar with all of these fallacies, and the total number is like, I don't know, 100 or something. There's a whole bunch. The idea is that if you familiarize yourself with all the wrong things to do, and you just don't do those wrong things, you should be well on your way to reasoning logically and without error.
Right.
So that's the key. And so, like, for instance, I guess if somebody's trying to become a marathon runner, they might try running and, throwing around a football and lifting weights and doing all this other stuff so that they can get to their goal of running further. But really only a few of those things will actually make a difference. The rest is just extra. But if they think they're helping, then that's going to lead to poor outcomes. You're not going to get what you thought you were going to get because it doesn't make any sense.
Right. And so that's what the fallacies are trying to do is pretty much say, do the claims of the argument make sense, or they're any way logical?
Right. Yeah. Okay. And sometimes they bleed into one another. That happens a lot. Overlap, where, like a red herring is something that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And so, but it might be compelling, or it might draw you off the topic.
Right.
So a lot of times people who, like politicians, they're really good at exactly what you were talking about earlier, winning arguments. They're really good at winning. They're not good at being logical and doing the right thing or whatever.
Or being correct.
Or being correct. Yeah, exactly. They don't have to be correct in order to be persuasive. So it's almost like a lawyer in a way. Like lawyers have to deal with facts of the case, but then there's also a lot of holes. They don't have all the facts. So they have to then use their best argument to try to push the case through.
Right.
And so, there's a certain amount of wiggle room. You don't always have all the facts. I just appreciate just having it in the back of my mind. So whenever I hear somebody say something, I can kind of reference it and go, okay. It's also one of those things where you have to practice. If you practice this, it'll become second nature. And then studies show that whenever people have critical thinking, that they've taken a class or whatever, they've studied it, that they tend to do much better in other areas of their life as well, because the ability to just reason correctly really helps you in, like, for instance, if you're trying to run a marathon or something, right. And you just.
So where does the steel man, straw man, like, is that considered an argument style, or where does that fit in?
So the straw man is a fallacy. So if you give me an argument where you're like if you tried to argue for universal income, let's just say that's your argument, want universal income for people. I could then make a shitty version of your argument which happens all the time again, and sometimes imperceptibly. All these examples that we give are real obvious. Most of the time it's not so obvious. It's real little stuff. And but let's say that's your argument. You're like, yeah, universal income for people, that seems like a good idea. And then I could say, oh, he wants to take all the money from government and drain government, then we won't have a government. And so sometimes these things can go together. So now it's a slippery slope too, where, oh, he wants to drain the government, and then that's going to do this and that's going to do that. And then we won't have a house. And then, but again,
they kind of overinflate the situation.
Right.
I read that paper that you had sent me. And it was kind of describing it like straw man as, like attacking the weakest part of your opponent's argument.
Yeah, that's a great,
And like you said, well, you want free healthcare, or you want what you said, universal income.
Yeah, I know they kind of go together, don't they?
Yeah. And then, the guy's like, oh, well, we just give money to everybody, it's creating this caricature of the weakest element and not giving any attention to the strongest parts of the element of the argument.
Right. And that kind of goes into bad faith and good faith arguments as well. Like you want to be as charitable as possible whenever you're trying to figure out if an argument is sound and if it's truthful. So in other words, you should be using the steel man argument, which is what you were saying earlier. That's whenever you do the opposite. So you try your very best to steel man the position, which means you're devil's advocate, but you're like made of asbestos. So like you can't burn, you're trying your best to make a tank of your opponent's argument so that you can understand it.
Right.
And so then you can show them that, look, even the best version of your argument isn't good enough. That's really compelling. It should be compelling.
Well, I thought what a key part of that article that you had sent, and I'll link to that in the show notes. But it was saying you switch your mindset from taking the position of I'm in this to win. You change that to I'm in this to be correct. And
to find the truth.
Right. When you take the position of reinforcing your opponent's argument, it does a few things, which it now makes your opponent feel like their side has been heard. And really, 90% of the time, that's what most people want to be heard. And so whenever you're reinforcing their argument, and reinforcing the argument is just kind of stating their argument back to them with the intention of trying to understand it completely. And so what you would be looking for after that would be for the other person, to kind of grade your assessment of their argument. And so, hopefully it'd be like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Right. And it's after that you can possibly start making progress into tearing down some of the argument, or you take their argument and that's the focus of your quote unquote attack. Instead of the weakest part of it, you attack the main argument. It's stronger because it allows people to be more open to the possibility of them being wrong. That's a very big possibility, is that once you understand their argument completely, perhaps you might then say, okay, well, you know what, you're right. That is the correct way to do this or whatever. Right. So it's not necessarily all about trying to convince them that you're right. It's about trying to see if their argument holds up.
It's about the argument, not about the person. I think that's, again, it's like the ad hominem thing.
Right.
It'd be great if we could get past people, just get past people. I do remember a quote that was something like, a good argument is like a crossbow. It's just as powerful in the hands of a child as a grown person, because it's already cocked and ready.
Right.
So it doesn't matter who you are. If it's a sound argument, it's a sound argument. And that's not the case today. As a blank, 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 I think, that's like how everybody starts their statements now. And that means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. It shouldn't mean anything anyway. There's another one I wanted to talk about that was the intentionality fallacy, which reminds me a lot of the truth effect that Foucault talked about. It's basically that intentionality of a product, mostly it's concerning art and writing. The intentionality of the author or the artist shouldn't be taken into account as much as what everybody else has made of it, as what the art itself has shown itself to be, which, I'd have to agree with that. There are times where I think, well, like I've kind of looked into how historians look at things. You do want to know what the original intention was, if you're trying to get a full picture. However, it does seem to be the case that when you make something and it goes out into the world and you're not there, your intentions don't matter as much, and that's kind of what you were saying before. One of our previous podcasts, you're talking about the red square,
right.
And the blue circle. If you called it a blue circle, it doesn't really matter, because if you painted a red square, other people would see that and they'd say, oh, it's a red square. You'd have a really tough fight ahead to try to convince.
The point is, it doesn't matter if it is a blue circle. If everyone that sees it says it's a red square, then it's a red square.
Right.
It's just because it's the majority of people see it that way, and so therefore that's what they call it.
So if they happen to see it the way that we would think is incorrect, it's still, if everybody sees it that way.
Right.
So that's kind of, I mean, there's a little bit of a difference there, because that seems like more of a populist kind of idea. Like, it depends on what most people see. It's kind of like, if everybody jumps off the bridge, would you go, kind of thing.
Well, kind of like the golden black dress that floated around social media a few years ago.
What's that about?
It was this dress. I think it was a picture of a dress, and I don't know how it became a viral thing, but some people saw it as, I think it was black, and some people saw it as gold, or it was definitely two different colors that might have been kind of close together.
Gotcha. But people were arguing back and forth about it.
Well, I mean, it wasn't so much as an argument as like, oh, I see black and I see gold. It was just that.
Oh, in cars, you ever have a friend who's like, that car is green, and you're like, no, that car's blue, dude. Like, you ever have that where you go back and forth on that?
That just sounds like color blindness.
Oh yeah, could be. But it's usually concerning art and reading or literary work is where it's usually used. So, well,
because the creator's not there when you're consuming the content. It's not like a video where you see the person saying it and you can hear inflection and tone and all that. Words and art are just completely subjective.
Yeah. Like, there's some pieces where they say, well, the artist's intention was to spread peace and love, and then the work actually ends up spreading hatred and anger. Well, that's what the work did. It doesn't really matter what they intended. And it kind of makes me think also of like the Me Too movement and like sexual harassment, because, it used to be that someone's intention was important. Like, oh, I didn't intend to offend you, or, whatever. Now it's not the case, because people say, well, you did. So it doesn't really matter what you meant to do. And so in cases like that, I'm kind of still in the middle, because, that's a court case kind of issue, kind of like a historian. You want to know everything. You want to go into all that and see, okay, well, like, again, if somebody murders someone and they didn't intend to, well, I don't think you should give them the same outcome.
It's manslaughter. It's not murder.
Right. Exactly. But that's only because of intention.
Right.
So that kind of refutes this idea in a way, but it depends. I mean, whenever it comes to art, I kind of more agree with it.
When you talk about the murder case, I think you're kind of taking it out of the realm of argument into a realm of action, so maybe, the fallacies don't necessarily have to work in instances of action as much as deciphering argument. You know what I mean?
Well, but you'd still be arguing about the person's, like the court case would be an argument about what to do with the person. So in that case, you would still want to know intentionality and all that, because you're still trying to decide. There's still facts that you're dealing with. Right. And then you're trying to decide, well, does intentionality matter in this case? You did end up murdering someone, whether you meant to or not, and that's where we go into like insanity pleas and things. Cause it's like, well, you didn't know what you were doing, but oversimplification, which is kind of self-explanatory. It's basically taking many reasons for something and turning it into just one reason. Like whenever people say, the reason for children to be depressed is because social media, and that's it. They try to sum it up in one thing.
Right.
So again, I mean, I see all these things everywhere, literally everywhere. And a lot of the most compelling things, kind of getting back to the idea of like algorithms and how they interface with our brains, they seem to favor this kind of content anyway, because it's more emotive. A lot of the best arguments aren't going to be that emotive. They're just going to be true. And sometimes we don't like them. We don't like that it's true. Like there was the examples, like in previous podcasts, you talked about the unleaded gasoline and that, or leaded gasoline causing people to have lower IQs and things like that too. And then whenever it was removed, it had a big decrease in violent crime is what you were talking about.
It was an increase in crime during the 80s.
During that time. Okay.
Yeah, they attribute the leaded gasoline to causing mental illness, which there's a proven link to it. But some scientists believe that's what led to the rise in crime during the 80s was the overabundance of lead fumes in the air.
Right. It kind of makes sense too. I mean, just what we know about lead and all. The other aspect of that is, or another argument, I guess, is that, abortion becoming legalized in Roe versus Wade actually had the effect of, and I think Adam Conover, that's where I learned about it actually. He said that abortion actually caused a knock-on effect of lowered violent crime, because by the time the kids who got aborted would have been like 15 to 18, which is prime violent age for boys, mostly, it would have been like 18 years later, and that's when the violent crime dropped. So I don't know. I just think it's important to have all these things kind of in the back of our mind and just to think about them.
Particularly the Steelman argument. To me, that seems like a very effective way of getting to the truth, because essentially what it's doing is just putting your argument aside to understand their argument. So you're taking the first step. You're not trying to make them understand your argument. You're putting yours aside, understanding their argument, and going from there, which, I mean, just seems like something that is very much needed in our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, the steel man aspect, it takes a special person to kind of do that thing, because you have to really believe the other side in order to fight for it. It's hard to steel man. Like, you got to at least somewhat believe it in order to really push it.
From what I understand, and you definitely have more education than I do on it, but there's a video by eBiz Facts on YouTube. I'll post that in the show notes as well.
All right. Yeah.
But it pretty much shows an argument between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. So Jordan was arguing on the behalf of religion, and Sam Harris was arguing on the behalf of science.
Wow.
And in the video, they both steelman each other.
Interesting.
It's very interesting to watch. And so they didn't necessarily try to believe what the other person was saying as much as just try to understand what the person was saying in the way so if you give me an argument, it's like, okay, so let me understand this correctly. And then I restate the argument back to you, matching what you believe. You know what I mean?
Right. Like repeating the question so that both parties agree to the terms.
Right. Restating it back to him so that you can actually understand it. Kind of like how they say the easiest way to learn something is to teach somebody how to do it. That's how you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So it's like knowing their argument and not necessarily agreeing with it, but at least understanding what they're saying enough to repeat it back to them. So when Sam Harris did that, Jordan Peterson was, pretty much acknowledged, like, yeah, perfect,
Okay.
And then he did it back to Jordan Peterson, which left them both in agreement. So
right.
Kinda, they didn't solve anything, but they weren't at odds. Like they understood each other's arguments.
That's good, man. Yeah, I mean, that'd be
super interesting.
It'd be wonderful if we had more of that in general. Like you're saying, if people were more apt to, and I don't know where that starts from. I don't know if that's something we need to teach in school. I wouldn't bank on parents teaching their kids this stuff because they don't even know it, like you said before.
I mean, obviously it can be a learned in the classroom type of thing.
Right.
But I think it's one of those things that could be basic enough. Everybody doesn't have to understand what a steelman argument is. They just need to change the motive of the argument.
Yeah, that's true.
Kind of like I said a little earlier, like instead of going into the argument to win, go in the argument to find truth or to convince. Whether that's convincing them or you, we'll see at the end of the argument. You also have to be willing to accept a correct or a logical point of view.
Right.
You have to be willing to accept that maybe what you're saying has more flaws than what they're saying.
Right. And that maybe what you're saying is just emotionally very compelling to you. Usually stuff travels because it tastes good to people. They listen to it and then they go, ooh, I like that. There's a lot of things out there that just people are attracted to. Again, with politicians, that's one of their favorite things to harp on, is all the things that are, your deepest wounds and your most proud moments. Let's see how we can put that in everything. Let me see how I can manipulate that. And that's another part of it. That's a thing we didn't even bring up, but manipulation. You're a lot harder to manipulate if you're not using, your emotional aspects to get through conversation or to get through the argument. If you can use these goalposts, like these really concrete ideas about what's good reasoning and what isn't, it should help. It should help people to keep their own sensibilities about what they believe. And like whenever we talk about the bubbles, people who are stuck in their own bubble, that should help with that too. Because, I like to ingest media from everywhere if I can. I like to just get it from whatever I can get it from, because I am confident that I can spot when something is fishy. I'm confident that I can reason well enough whenever someone presents me with an argument. And I can say, I don't know, this seems fishy, this seems odd, whatever.
So you believe that you're impervious to manipulation?
Oh, not at all. But I do think that I am able to stay afloat in unfamiliar waters. And I think that's a key aspect. If I didn't have critical thinking behind, if I didn't have that training, the little bit I have, if I didn't have that, I don't know that I'd be able to do that. It seems like I get a lot of, like I tell some of my other friends, I say, I like to listen to things from the right. I like to listen to things from the left. I don't necessarily like it, but I like to do it because I want to see what their argument is. I really want to see it. I want to see it from the horse's mouth. Like, what does this mean? What I usually get from them is, from the people who are on my side, whatever that side that is, they usually say, oh, be careful. And I'm like, what do you mean, be careful? They're like, well, you don't want to get brainwashed or something. And that's kind of what I'm saying, is like, I'm not really worried about getting brainwashed, because I've trained myself to at least notice some of the basic stuff. And again, advertising uses this language too. And I feel like I'm also not impervious, but I definitely notice all the moving parts. Whenever an advertisement shows me a happy family eating Kentucky Fried Chicken, I know that they're just saying, you'll be happy if you eat the Kentucky Fried Chicken or whatever.
Oh, I agree. And I feel, the same way. Like during the Saints game last night, there was both an Amazon and a Walmart commercial. And I don't know, Walmart just came out with Walmart Plus, which is supposed to be a competitor to Prime.
Well, it's good there's finally a competitor, though.
But both of them had commercials that were like very family oriented. It was like holiday kind of lovey, warm feeling. And it was like, I saw the Amazon commercial and I already picked up on I was like, what are these people selling? And I think it was like a flashlight, but he ordered through the commercial, he orders it off of Amazon or something like that.
Right.
I know it's got a lot with like music for sure. You can change the whole feel of something with sound, not even necessarily music. Right.
It reminds me of those drug commercials. Whenever you watch a drug commercial and it's like may cause bleeding and anal dysfunction and blah, it's going through all this stuff. And then there's the music and then there's the people like playing tennis or whatever.
Right.
Oh my God, do they really think that we don't notice all of what this guy's saying for a minute? It's like, you might die. Who knows?
Well, no, I was watching, I think it's called The 100. It's almost like a game show, I guess. But essentially you're watching this group and they get 100 people and all these people are just a number. And then they start running different psychological tests on them just to kind of see, what percentage of people choose chocolate or whatever, just these different, each episode is like a different thing. I did my senior thesis in art school kind of on similar stuff. So it's a little like beginner level into that kind of psychology. But it is pretty cool. So they took two groups of people randomly chosen. I think they split it in half. So I think it was 50 and 50. Okay. And they showed them clips of heavy machinery accidents. So like cranes falling over, stuff like that. Right. And the first group, they showed it with no music, no whatever. It was just the actual sound from the video. Okay. At the end of the video, they asked them how many people thought the video was funny. And there was like 4 people or something like that. It was a very small number, but they were like, oh, it's kind of funny to see clips of these
sociopaths,
of these crazy things happening. Well, they didn't even call them sociopaths because it was any video you would scroll through Facebook. And, kind of like a fails video.
It wasn't violent. It wasn't like somebody getting crushed. It was just like the machine falling over or something.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like gory or anything like that.
Oh, okay.
One of the examples was like the Tour de France, and they showed a bicyclist in front falls and like the whole thing crashes.
Oh, okay. Well, that's funny. I'd laugh at that.
I mean, and some people did.
Right.
But then they took the second group, and what they did was they added a laugh track to the video. And so in certain spots, like when the guy falls with the bike, you kind of hear like this crowd laughing or whatever. And like almost everybody in the entire group thought the video was funny, and it was the same video. Yeah, well, and so I'm just saying the effects of sound or music.
Mood. Yeah, that kind of mood music.
It absolutely affects you.
Yeah. Well, it makes me wonder.
It's one reason that I think, or that I believe, Christian music is so effective, because they use very specific chords. I have many friends that play music, and a lot of them play church gigs on Sunday.
Okay.
And I know a majority of them aren't even Christian.
Right.
But yet they're playing worship music. So it's not like God's playing music through them.
Yeah, no, I get you. The mystical part isn't there. It's just the psychology.
It's the notes. It's
okay.
Those
like
sounds kind of bring you into that kind of emotional state.
Right. That's weird. I mean, just the fact that sounds can do that is strange by itself. It seems to only work for people. Like, we don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I've seen dogs like howl to different songs and stuff like that.
I don't know if that's the same, but no, but yeah, no, it might be. I don't know. There's probably some. That's what we'll do next time. Maybe we'll find some animal videos of animals with music. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think it's definitely more connected to us and the universe kind of planet. I mean, a sound wave naturally exists, and all music is vibrating sound waves at different frequencies. Yeah. And so I think it definitely has, I mean, our bodies vibrate on a specific frequency. The earth vibrates on a specific frequency. So music, to be able to affect our emotions that way, it almost kind of makes sense to me, because all it is a sound wave. You know what I mean? It's just a frequency. Yeah. I mean, it's just like scary music. You know what I mean?
Man, the spider sound from Arachnophobia, that doink, 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 that little like, oh God, the like plinky, whatever.
Right. I mean, there's a reason it's very similar soundtracks for, rom-coms and all horror movies have very similar soundtracks. It's very effective.
That makes me think about, especially the laugh track aspect. Because I love comedies. I love comedies of all kinds. And I have noticed that there is just a different feeling to comedies if they have a laugh track or if they don't have a laugh track. And I'm not really sure that I come on, I think it's just depends on the situation maybe. And it depends on the effect that they're trying to go for. But I don't know. It's like it can start to feel kind of cheap because of that, because once you add a laugh track, it's funny no matter what, or it feels funny no matter what, even if the actual joke wasn't that good or, whatever. Right. But then sometimes things feel empty if they don't have a laugh track. Like if I watch, like The Office. The Office was great because there was no laugh track. It's just them, doing their thing. And I think it would be horrible with a laugh track.
Oh, absolutely. It would make it feel 90s.
90s.
It's so 90s. Yeah. It would feel like watching Family Matters or something. You know what I mean?
Right. It's weird that the laugh tracks can be just so obvious. The effect they have can be so obvious, and it still works. And then at the same time, if you're sitting at home, that's another thing. Is if you're sitting at home by yourself, you probably won't even laugh because it's just you. It's like, but if you're with people, there's a good chance you're going to laugh because you're with people.
I know you don't watch sports, but
no,
since
you're right.
The NFL started playing again, they weren't allowing fans in, and the very first game I saw didn't have any kind of sound, And
that's weird.
Super freaking weird, man. Like,
oh man,
it really took a lot of the excitement out of the game. But the next game I watched, like it was the Saints game, they put a crowd track behind it, and dude, it made such a big fucking difference.
Even though it was fake. That's amazing.
Even though you knew it was fake.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
It made a real big difference. Another good example is, and it's called Horace and Pete. It's on Hulu. Have you seen that?
It's new?
No. This is probably like 2016.
Okay. No, I haven't seen it though.
It's a drama, and it's about him. He's Horace and his brother's Pete. I believe that's how it goes. And they own a bar that has like an apartment on top of it. And that's kind of the whole premise of the thing. But they don't have any soundtrack, any laugh track. It was really weird. It's almost like watching a play on TV. You know what I mean? Like, you know how a play it's just silent. It's just
kind of flat
talking. Yeah. But the discussion is like, the writing is freaking incredible.
Okay.
I want to say I counted like a 15-minute monologue of Horace like sitting down having tea. You should check it out. It's pretty crazy. All right, man. I guess that's it about arguments. So, I guess we'll see you next time.
All right, man. See you later.
Thanks for listening to Armchair Radio. We release a new podcast every Tuesday, so please click that follow button so you can hear what we talk about next. If you're interested in any of the topics that we've covered, check out our website, armchairradiopodcast.com, where we have links to everything in our show notes. And if you've enjoyed the show, please share with your friends. We're available on iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts exist. Thanks again for listening, and hope to see you next time.